Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf Samach Vav. This week's learning is sponsored by Ruth Rotenberg in loving memory of their eldest daughter Taniel Gavria Margalit on her 20th year at site. Hashem gifted us a beautiful neshama for 18 years. She remarkably accomplished so much, and so many continue to carry her passions and deeds. Today's daf is sponsored by Mickey Kaddish in loving memory of her father Daniel Ben Avraham on his Shloshim. And today's daf is sponsored by Judy Schwartz in loving memory of her mother Shirley K. Tider, Sarah Rezel Bat Mordechai Yitzchak and Frida Sima, and her grandmother Esther Bat Sinai and Chaya. My beloved mother had the schut of living in Israel. My beloved grandmother, who I never knew, died of typhus in the Lodz ghetto. May their memories be a blessing. And today's daf is dedicated in memory of Ariel and Kfir Bibas and Oded Lifshitz, and we pray for the safe return of Ariel and Kfir's mother Shiri. Our hearts are with the families and with the entire nation. Okay, with that, we will get started. We're finishing up. We're going to do a lot of different topics today. We're going to finish up the Menachesh. If you remember, we were talking about the people who are Menachesh. It's within the realm of the whole sorcery issue, which are something different. It's people who use things as signs. They say, oh, the bread fell. That's a bad omen. Okay, and then they think something bad is going to come and maybe even act upon it, right? And therefore do something because they believe that any of the following things happen, which we read yesterday. We're in the middle, so we're going to start from the top of our daf. Al tatchil bi. If the tax collector comes first to your house, you say, oh, that's a bad sign. I got my tax collected first. Shacharitu. If they come to collect, again, this is, I'm going with Rashi's interpretation. If they come to collect something you owe someone first thing in the morning, you say, oh, that's a really bad sign, right? It's going to be a bad day. Rosh Chodeshu. So you say, it's Rosh Chodesh today. Don't come to me today. Come to me tomorrow, right? All these things, basically, you're saying, this is a bad sign. Don't come to me now, right? And basically say, based on the fact that you came to me here, it's a bad omen. Motzei Shabbatu, or they came on Motzei Shabbat, say, not now. Really what they mean, Motzei Shabbat is the first day of the week. It was the way of saying also Sunday, I think. Tanu Rabbanit lo tenachashu v'lo ta'onenu kagon elo hamenachashim b'chulda be'ofot u'b'dagim. These are people who take signs from the chulda, the ofot, the dagim. Okay, they take signs from all these animals and beings and say, oh, look, there's a sign from their actions. Some people have a different girsa. Dagim is kochavim, from the stars. Okay, this is like astrology. We take the signs of astrology and then again act upon it, right? To read what your astrological whatever must be. You read in the paper, that's not what we're talking about. That's like a silliness. Or I don't know, maybe people really believe in it and it's something, but to really believe in it and take it to the next level of, I believe in this and this is telling me how I should behave, that's already part of this lo taseh, this prohibition of lo lenachesh. Again, where we draw the line, okay, that's a halachic question. We're not getting into all the details and all of that now. Hamechalel et Shabbat. We're now up to the next Mishnah. The next person who gets stoned, someone who desecrates Shabbat. In what way? B'davar shechayavim al zdono karet v'al shigigato chatat. Well, if you remember, in Shabbat, there's all sorts of ways you could do malachot. So there's 39 malachot. If you do them on purpose with aiding, with witnesses, with warning, and they said, if you do this, you'll get stoned. You'll get stoned. If you do it and you don't have warning, but you did it intentionally, then you'll get punished by God, karet. If it was accidental, you didn't realize it was Shabbat, or you didn't realize the malacha was forbidden, then you bring a sin offering. So what they're telling you in this Mishnah is only on those sins that you did on Shabbat, that you would have to bring a sin offering if you did it unwittingly, or you would get karet if there weren't witnesses and warnings. Those are the things in which you get stoned. Okay, just for things like that would you get stoned. So now the question is, what else is there, right? In other words, it seems to be excluding something. What is it excluding? Bichlal, so the Gemara says immediately, and this, interestingly, this is a huge topic in and of itself in Masechet Shabbat, but it's kind of like the Gemara, it doesn't say this, but it's like, go see Masechet Shabbat if you want to understand the details of this law, because there's a huge entire Masechet that deals with this. But right now, we're just going to answer one small question, because if you remembered, all the others, like what is a mechashev? What is this, right? What are the details? We get all the details here. This one, we're not going to start getting into all the details of Shabbat. We'll never get out of it. So, but they do want to know one thing, which is Michlal, the wording of this Mishnah implies, there could be a way that you could desecrate Shabbat Ve'ein chayavin lo al shigato chatav v'lo al dono karet. And yet you wouldn't have. In other words, it's telling you, you're only going to get stoned if you do it in this way. But there seems to be some other way you could desecrate Shabbat where you wouldn't get stoned by Torah law. So what could that possibly be? Well, we're going to have two possibilities, and each one only accords with one person's opinion. Tchumin va'aliba de Rabbi Akiva. You might remember we learned this in Masechet Shabbat. There's a big machloket about Tchum Shabbat. You're not allowed to go outside the Tchum, more than 2,000 cubits outside the Tchum. There's a machloket, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, is this derived or Rabbanit? Rabbi Akiva holds it's derived, which means it could be talking about that because it's not one of the 39. You don't get karet if you go outside the Tchum. It's just a negative prohibition. So that would be a case. Now, if you hold it's rabbinic, then it wouldn't be mentioned in this Mishnah because they don't need to tell you you don't get stoned for something that's rabbinic. Of course, the rabbis aren't going to stone you for something that's just rabbinic. So that's that. There's a side problem with this Mishnah in light of commentaries about the whole machloket between them. I'll just add one small point. If you don't follow, don't worry. It's really not on the daf, but there's the machloket between them. You might remember this. There's a debate among the Rishonim whether the machloket between them is about Tchum Shabbat in general. The rabbis don't think there is any issue of Tchum Shabbat according to Torah law. Some people say it's just how much. In the Torah, it's 12 meal, and in the rabbis, it's 2,000 cubits. And then the rabbis do think there is something of Tchum Shabbat in the Torah, and then it wouldn't make sense because then you could, that opinion doesn't fit here because then it could also fit with the rabbis and just be 12 meal. A smaller amount is, a larger amount is Tchum Shabbat. In other words, you have to, 12 meal is more than 2,000 cubits. You would have to leave a farther distance in order to go over the Torah law of it. So anyway, there's a bit of a question here about that, but we're going to leave that aside. We'll just keep it simple here, which is Tchum Shabbat, according to the rabbis, is not by Torah law, in which case the Mishnah can't be referencing it. And we know this one already, Hav'ara v'aliva de Rabbi Yossi. Lighting a fire, there's a whole debate. Is it just a negative prohibition, right? Remember, Havara lechalek yatzat or lelav yatzat. So according to Rabbi Yossi, it came to tell you it's only a negative prohibition, which means it's only a negative prohibition. You would get lashes, you wouldn't have karet, you wouldn't have a chatat, a sin offering, and that would be a case where you wouldn't get stoned. If you did it with witnesses, with warning and all that, you wouldn't get stoned. You would just get, I guess, a punishment, but you wouldn't, right? You would get lashes. You wouldn't get that. Okay. Now we're done with Shabbat. That was all very quick. All of Shabbat in a minute. Now we get to Hamikalel Aviv v'imo. If you curse your mother or father, Eino chayav. Now it says in the Torah. Okay, we're going to see where they get it from the Torah, but we're going to see the pasuk. Maybe I'll even read the pasuk because we're going to darshan it all. Ki ish asher yikalel et aviv et imo. Okay, first of all, we're going to darshan this ish. Why does it say man twice? Mot yumat. Aviv imo kilel, you'll die. Why? Because you cursed your mother and father, which is a little strange. We already said that. But okay. Damav bo. Now remember, damav bo, demehem bam, that's from the Oven Yedoni. And Oven Yedoni were skila, therefore this is also skila, stoning. But they're adding one thing here. Eino chayav ad shekalalem b'shem. You have to curse them in the name of God. You won't get stoned if you just curse your parents. But if you curse your parents using God's name, you will get stoned. And now we have a machloket, like we saw with cursing God in general, kilalam bikinoi. What if you curse them with just a name of God, not the name of God, but a nickname of God? So Rabbi Meir mechayev, chachamim potchim. We have a machloket, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, and we'll see their source in the Gemara. Man chachamim. So who is this chachamim who says you're going to be exempt if you use a kinoi? Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi. Now we're going to say it's not actually the majority opinion. It's actually one person's opinion. Ditanya Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi Omel. Binokvo shem yumat. Where's that pasuk from? That is the pasuk about cursing God. I'll read you the whole pasuk again. Vinokev shem Hashem, one who curses the name of God. Mot yumat, will be killed. Ragom yirgamubo kol ha'ida, everyone will stone him. Kager ke'ezrach, like a ger, a convert, an ezrach, a citizen. Binokvo shem yumat. Now, it already said at the beginning of the pasuk, nokev shem Hashem. And at the end of the pasuk, it says, vinokev shmo, binokvo shem yumat. It's repeated. What's that repeated for? Well, according to Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Yossi, okay, you might remember, we learned before, why is it repeated? Because you have to be nokev shem bishem. You have to curse God using the name of God to curse God, saying, God is going to curse God. Okay? Now, here, Rabbi Nachman Rabbi Yossi darshans it differently. He doesn't accept that drasha. Binokvo shem yumat, matam lo shem. Why does it say shame? Limed, in other words, it's totally unnecessary here. And this is a classic, Rashi says it. It's called an ime no inyan, which we're going to actually see in the Gemara today. And Din and Daf this week, went up yesterday, is about this type of drasha, ime no inyan, and about drashot in general, like how the rabbis darshan. Limed ala mekalel aviv v'imo she'eno chayav ad shekalalim b'shem. Well, if this isn't talking about cursing God, because it already said that in the beginning of the pasuk, it must be talking about cursing someone else. What else could it be? Oh, well, who else is so serious when you curse someone else? Your parents. And therefore, it's saying only if you curse your parents using the name of God will you be obligated. And the name of God specifically, not a nickname. That's the Chachamim. Okay, and which again is really Rabbi Nachum, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Meir obviously will read that pasuk. Oh no, that pasuk is specifically about God, and it doesn't teach you about your parents. Now, yes, he still thinks you need to curse in the name of God, but it could be even a nickname of God because he doesn't have that drasha. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to get to a braita that darshans each section of this pasuk, and the real reason why we're bringing this is because we want to know how do we know the punishment is stoning. Okay, but while we're in this braita, we're going to learn all sorts of other things. And then when we're done with that, we're going to say, okay, we got where the punishment is, but like everything, we need to know also punishment and also where is there a negative prohibition. And in fact, if you look at the entire Torah, you will not find a place where it says it is forbidden to curse your parents. It just says, if you curse your parents, you will get the death penalty. But again, we always have to have a negative commandment. So where are we going to get the negative commandment for cursing? So before we get there, we're going to start with this braita. Tanu Rabbanan, Ish. Matam Lomar Ish Ish. Why does it say Ish Ish? Could have just said Ish. What do you get from the double language? Lirabot bat tumtum v'androginus. It comes to include also a woman, not just a man. It's actually funny. The word man repeated includes a female. Okay, tumtum and androginus. That means right someone who we're not sure if they're male or female, or someone who has both simanim of both genitals of male and female. Now, this is interesting. Once you have male and you have female, wouldn't you think that all those in-betweens would be obviously included? This supports the opinion. If you remember, we learned about tumtum and androgynous. Some people view them as unique individuals, that they're not male, they're not female, they're something else. And then that would mean you would need a special drasha to include them. Asher yakalel et aviv et imo. So now they say the following. It says, who curses, let's translate this literally, their father and their mother. So what might you think? It sounds like you might have to be obligated only if you'll only get stoned if you curse both of them. Aviv shelo imo, imo shelo aviv. What if it's only one? Your father, not your mother not your father. Minayi. Talmud lomar. Aviv v'imo kilel damav bo. Aviv kilel imo kilel divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Okay, this is a little hard to understand how he gets this, but what this means is, if you look carefully in the pasuk, it says, Ish ish asher yikalel et aviv et imo. Notice the juxtaposition of the father and the word curse. Yikalel et aviv. At the second part of the pasuk, it says, aviv v'imo, which is the same order, father then mother. But then it says kilel. The klala word comes at the end of that phrase, next to the word imo, which means, that's why they're saying here, aviv v'imo kilel damav bo, aviv kilel imo kilel. The first part of the pasuk is the klala going next to the father. The second pasuk has the word klala going next to the mother. So from there, you learn each one individually, you be obligated for it. So weird kind of drashot, but again, drashot have their own type of way of working. This is divrei Rabbi Yoshia. We're going to have a machloket Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Yonatan. Later today, we're going to have another machloket between them. Rabbi Yonatan omer, mashma shnehem ke'echad u'mashma echad b'fnei atzmo. It could be this way, it could be that way. Ad shifrot l'cha katuv yachdav. In other words, if you curse them both, you'll be obligated. But even if you curse just one of them, you'll be obligated. When do we know when it says two things and it means only both of them together? Only when the Torah says, this is a general rule he's giving you, only when the Torah says yachdav. Okay, if you say yachdav, then it means both together. Rashi says, where's the famous pasuk where it says that? In kilayim, that you can't take two different animals together. Okay, there it says yachdav. It has to be two different animals using them, let's say, to pull your wagon. That would be if they work together. But here it doesn't say yachdav. Therefore, the default is each one by themselves. Mot yumat, this is why we probably brought this, b'skila, because they want to know, how do you know skila? Right? Maybe skila, maybe something else. Ne'emar kan damav bo v'ne'emar lahalan demehem bam. Ma lahalan b'skila, av kan b'skila. So it says damavo, it says in our pasuk, it says dimehem bam in the oven yidoni. So since that's skila, this is skila, it's basically the same thing, just one is in the singular, one is in the plural. Onesh shamanu as harami nayin. So now we get to what I said we're going to really spend a lot of time on, which is where is the warning? Okay, this is all a very long breita, okay? And in this breita, we have all the important topics about, like, that's why I compared it to Shabbat. This is really where you learn about cursing your mother and father, as opposed to Shabbat, where we learned it all in Masechet Shabbat, and they didn't bother going into it. So now we have the punishment. Where do we know that you're warned not to do it? Talmud lomar, Elohim lo tekalel. Come to this pasuk, which says Elohim, don't curse Elohim. I'm specifically not translating it yet. V'nasi ba'amcha lo ta'or, and don't curse a nasi. Now, when you have nasi and Elohim parallel in the pasuk, right, it's likely the pasuk when it says Elohim, if we learned this before, Elohim often means judges. So it probably means don't curse judges and don't curse nasiim. Okay, they're both types of leaders of the people. We're now going to say, okay, we'll see later. There's a big machloket about that pasuk. Is Elohim God or is Elohim judges? Well, we'll deal with that later. So now they're going to say that pasuk, we're assuming right now it means judges, that pasuk is coming to include parents. Okay. How? We're going to have to figure out. So im hayaviv dayan harei bechlal Elohim lo tekalel. So first of all, if your father was a judge, okay, included. Im hayaviv nasi harei bechlal v'nasi b'amcha lo ta'ol. Okay, if he was the nasi, then you would be forbidden to curse him also because he's your father, also because he's your nasi. Okay, but Eno lo dayan v'lo nasi minayin. What they're basically trying to set up is, but what if he's not either? Then how can you possibly learn from this pasuk? Not to mention the mother, who's not going to be a dayan and not going to be a nasi. So amarta harei atadan binyan ad mishnehen. It must be. We say this creates a paradigm, and from there we're going to learn to the father and mother. Okay, how? Well, the way we're going to see it is like this. We're going to do. Remember the limud of a least common denominator. We're going to basically highlight that this has something unique that the other one doesn't have, which means that because that one has something unique, and then you would think it only applies to things that are unique in that way, but if the other one doesn't have that uniqueness and also you're obligated, then it must be that that unique thing is not what's causing the obligation. And then we have to find the least common denominator between the two, and from there we'll create our paradigm, anything similar to that least common denominator. That's in a simple way. We'll see it's a little more complicated than that, but let's start. Lo re'i nasi k're'i dayan v'lo re'i dayan k're'i nasi. In other words, if you put them opposite each other, you're going to see they're not similar. Lo re'i dayan k're'i nasi, sharei dayan atam tzuvel hara'ato, k're'i nasi she'yatam tzuvel hara'ato. A dayan, you have to listen to their ruling. A nasi, you don't have to listen to their rulings, okay? They don't do teachings of teaching halacha that you have to listen to. And therefore, if you would say the dayan, you're chayav for cursing because you have to listen to what they teach you, well, that's not true for the nasi, so that can't be what makes you liable stoning for cursing. The nasi, you're commanded to accept his authority. You're not commanded to accept the authority of the judge, not in the same way anyway, right? There's different things. One has listening to their rulings, and the other is listening to them as a ruler. So again, that one doesn't have that one. What's the least common denominator? Shehen ba'amcha, that they're within your nation, as they're part of your people. V'atamus haral kilatan, and you're not allowed to curse them. So let's bring your father, who's also part of your nation. Now, for this thing, you could have really said anyone that it sounds like you can't curse. But again, this is a classic where they know what they want to get to in the end. They want to get to the father. And you can see the father in a little bit of sense. Father for you is an authority figure. So we could put him in the same category and include more. Well, let's include the father and obviously also the mother. We're just talking the masculine here, but it obviously includes the mother as well. So now they say, but wait, if you look at the two of them, there is something that's similar to both, a less least common denominator. That wouldn't be true for the father. Shekain gudulatam garmalahem. Their greatness is what caused this whole thing. So now we have a bit of a problem. That's why I said this could get a little more complicated, because it's not really true that you could do that. Well, Talmud Lomar, we're now going to pick a totally different pasuk. It says, Lo tekalel cheresh, you can't curse a deaf person. Here they're not talking about the greatest people. They're talking about the people who have serious handicaps. So now, right, remember, cheresh in the Torah usually means deaf mutes. Okay? Can't speak, can't hear. So now they say, well, Mala Cheresh Sheken Charishato Garmalo, Nasi v'Dayan Yochichu. Mala Nasi v'Dayan Sheken Gedulatam Garmalahem Cheresh Yochiach. They're basically going to say, right, those have Gedula, but the Cheresh doesn't have that same greatness in stature. The Cheresh has the issue that it's from the disability that caused it. That's going to be opposite those who it's not because of their disability. And then we're going to get to the least common denominator of those three together. Lo rizeh, right? That's not like that, and that's not like that. Now we get to something much more broad, which is it's not because of specific disability only. It's not because of specific greatness only. It's the tzara shaveh. It's what's the least common denominator, which is, again, these are people within your nation, and you're liable for cursing them. So now they say, Afani avicha. So that would allow us then to include the father and mother. Now, the reason why they get to the father and not to anyone else is because they know there's a pasuk that says there's punishment, right? Now, we're trying to, it's one of those cases where we know what we're looking for, and we're allowed to do that kind of thing, where it must be including something else. Oh, well, it says there's a punishment for someone who does this, so this must be the warning for it. So now they say, but wait, all these people stand out. Okay? The Cheresh, the Nasi, and the Dayan, they stand out. Like a father doesn't stand out. Everybody's a father who has children, right? That kind of counts for a decent part of the population. Is either a father or a mother. So they don't stand out in any way. Ella im kein nichtov kra, o Elohim v'cheresh, o Nasi v'cheresh. So now they're going to say, fine. Forget the fact that we're learning from all three. We're not. Nasi and Cheresh or Elohim and Cheresh would have been perfect. One and one, right? You have each showing you something different, and that would have been enough, right? That would have taught you one for that and one for that, and that teaches us people who are stand out in some way. You can't curse. But the obvious problem here is Elohim Lamali. In other words, you could have either done Elohim and Cheresh, or you could have done Nasi and Cheresh. And if you just done Nasi and Cheresh, then Elohim is basically totally unnecessary. Theoretically, you could have said Nasi is unnecessary because you could have had Elohim and Cheresh, but they're going to go with, we're going to darshan it from Elohim. Okay? Because, again, right, you see already it's in parallel. One is, right, got two things in it, and one pasuk has one. All you need is one in each place. We have an extra from that extra. We're going to darshan it. Now we get to the Imeno and Yan that Alana gets off on her Shiur, which is sorry, I lost it. Imeno and Yan legufo teneu and Yan la'aviv. Well, since Elohim can't be talking about itself, because the Nasi could have taught you that someone who is great in your community you shouldn't curse. Then let's learn from there la'aviv. Let's take it to somewhere else. What must that be? Again, the obvious, because of the pasuk that says you're going to get killed if you do it. Must be aviv, and again, aviv imo. So now they say, wait, now we have to go back to this thing I mentioned before, which is there's a debate about whether Elohim is God or Elohim is a judge. Until now, we've been reading this as a judge. So, Hani Chalamanda Amar Elohim Chol. If you say Elohim is Chol, meaning a judge, not a sacred Elohim, then this all works perfectly fine because it's totally unnecessary. The other pasuk talks about, right, the Nasi and the judge. There's no reason to say both, and we've gotten there. And we can end, right? But Laman Amar Kodesh Ma'ikalamemer. If you say it's God, how are you going to explain it then? Titania, because then you're not going to say it's Ba'amcha. God is not Ba'amcha, right? It's not a person. Titania. Now we're going to just see that there's a machloka, and then we're going to try to resolve the problem. Elohim Chol Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva Omer Elohim Kodesh. Okay, we have a machloka. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael. Is Elohim Chol or is it Kodesh? So Rabbi Yishmael says it's Chol, and that works. That's our whole sugya. But to Rabbi Akiva, how are we going to explain our sugya? Vitanya, and it says in a Braita, Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Omer, as haran mevarechet Hashem minayin, and he says, where do you get the warning for not cursing God? Talmud Lomar Elohim lo tekalel, like Rabbi Akiva. It's learned from this pasuk. So now they answer the question, and they say something that sounds very simple, but really doesn't make sense. Lemanda amar Elohim chol gamar kodesh michol. So now they're going to say, fine. If you go with Rabbi Yishmael and you say it's chol, how do you get the warning for God there? That's very easy. We're going to learn kodesh from chol. If you get cursed for cursing judges, if you have a negative prohibition for cursing judges, obviously from there we can infer a negative prohibition for cursing God. Lamanda Amar Elohim Kodesh is obviously going to be the more difficult one, though. If you say it's God, well, they don't think that's a problem either. Gamrinan Chol Kodesh. You can learn about not cursing a judge from not cursing God. So the Gemara is going to immediately say, okay, Bishlam Lamanda Amar Elohim Chol. We understand the first thing you said, which is if it's a judge, Gamar Kodesh Michol, you can learn something sacred for something not sacred. You could say if you can't curse a judge, obviously you can't curse God. But Ela Lamanda Amar Elohim Kodesh, Gamar Chol Kodesh. It doesn't make sense to say this is a warning against God. Oh, humans are like God, so let's just learn out to humans. That doesn't make any sense. Dilma Kodesh Ishar Acholo Azhal. Maybe they were warning you about specifically God. They weren't warning you about anybody else. So they say, well, how are we going to eventually get it? Because im kain lichtov kra lo takel. They're going to say, really, the pasuk is teaching you two things. Could have said lo takel. Now, it's interesting. Lekalel is to curse. Lahakel is to treat someone lightly, not respectfully. So they're saying it could have just said lo takel, and with that, you would have understood lo takalel. The fact that they add an extra lamed, my lo takalel, shma mina tarte, right? We've had that with lo tachel and lo tachalel. So they have the same thing with lo takel and lo tekalel. And that's why you could get two things. So it is talking about God, you could say, but the extra lamed is teaching you about people as well. And therefore you get the warning for both. And that was a very long-winded way to get to where do we see the warning, that the warning is in Elohim lo tekalel, is the warning for not cursing your parents. How we got there took us a while, right? And we had basically two tracks. One is to say it's imeno inyan, and the other was really, you could also say they wanted other ones, imeno and yam, but if it's speaking about God, you have to make this extra step of saying the double language, the double lamed teaches you something more. And with that, we finish. That was, by the way, right, one very long braita, and then just a little bit of trying to figure out the braita and how it worked with that machloket about whether Elohim is God or Elohim is judges. Now we're on the next topic, which will take us to the end. We'll finish this up today, and then tomorrow's daf will already be on the next topic, which is the mesid and then the mediach. So haba al naara muasar. Our topic now is naara muasar. We're at the top of Amud Bet. Someone who engages in relations with a betrothed young woman, we'll call her. What is a naara? Let's talk about. Okay, you might remember from Seder Nashim, particularly in Ketubot, we talked about this a lot. There's the first stage of a person's life. They're called a ketana. Okay, we're talking about women specifically here. They're a ketana. When they get to age 12 and have two simanim, like two pubic hairs, then they're called a naara. And they're in that stage for 6 months. At the end of that 6-month stage, they become a bogeret, which is already, they're more mature. They're already considered not in their father's domain anymore. There's all sorts of rules. So the person who sleeps with a naara muasa, notice she's both betrothed, but she's also a naara. And the Mishnah is going to basically tell us the criteria for a man who sleeps, remember, a man who sleeps with a married woman, whether she's betrothed or whether she's married, the punishment is chenek, strangulation, both for the man and for the woman. But if he engages in relations with a naara muasa who's betrothed and she's a naara, and we'll see all the criteria that needs to be, then they both get stoned. Okay, there's a case where only he gets stoned, and that's if he rapes her. But if it was consensual, then they both get the death penalty of stoning. And then it's a more severe punishment. So the Mishnah reads, here are the criteria. Number one, naara. Sounds like it's only for that 6-month period, okay? After reaching maturity. Bitula, she needs to be a virgin. Mo'rasa, she needs to be betrothed. And he bebeit avia, another criteria. She has to be still in her father's domain. We'll see in a minute when we get to the Gemara, in the Braita, what this means. Generally, when she's betrothed, she's in her father's domain. You would just think this means in the father's domain, but then when she's married, she's in the husband's domain, but then you don't need to say that because obviously that's included in Morasa, so this must be adding something additional. We'll get to it soon. Here's a different law. What if two men engage in relations with her? Harishon biskila, asheni b'chenek. So the first one's going to get stoned. The second one will get the regular punishment of chenek because he's no longer the first. Okay, you could say that what we assume we're talking about, and Rashi says this, is the opinion that says that if you have bi'asha lo kedarka, you're going to be liable. But bi'asha lo kedarka, right? There's a debate whether that means you're not a virgin anymore. So you'd have to say bi'asha lo kedarka means you're not really a virgin anymore, and that's why the second one is not liable anymore because you're not really considered a virgin. If it was that he had normal relations with her, then it would be obvious that the second one wouldn't be because she's not a virgin. So they must be coming to tell you also about this Bia Shelo Kedarka. Okay, again, side point. Let's move to the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan. Naara, now the Braita does typical fashion, which is the same as the Braita we just saw earlier in the previous sugya, which is the Braita takes that the laws in the Mishnah are pretty much stated. These are the laws. The Midrash Halacha goes back and traces it to the verses. That's why we have the ish, and all that, right? Let's see how we learn all this from the Psukim. So now they're going to say naara. Okay, the pasuk reads like this: Ki yihiyen naara betulam or rasal ish umatza ish ba'ir v'shachavima. Okay, so there's a naara. She's a betulam or rasal ish. Okay, we're going to darshan all those words. She's a naara, not a bogeret. She's a betula, but not beula. So she's a virgin, not a virgin. Mo'orasa, she's betrothed and not married. Bebeit avia, what do we learn from that term? That's in a different pasuk. Pra l'shemasar ha'av l'shluchei ha'bal. Now they say, well, it's not just that she gets married. If the father, this must have been something that would happen before the wedding, he would pass over his daughter to the messengers of the husband. So it's like I was thinking, I mean, different, but I don't want to compare women to commodities. But if you're returning something of a friend, right? And then you give it to someone to give it to them. You feel like it's already out of your responsibility, right? So she's already out of her father's domain as soon as the messengers of the husband kind of pick her up to take her to the wedding or something like that. It must have been just before the wedding. Already at that point, if someone is to engage in relations, she's no longer, this whole thing of naara murasa, the reason why it's so severe, it's like the Bat Kohen. In fact, we're going to get back to the Bat Kohen a little bit today. But it disgraces her father because she's still in her father's domain and she's betrothed to someone, and it's a big breach there for the father. And that's part of the issue. Once she's given over to the messenger of her husband, she's already out of the father's domain. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Now Rav Yehuda Amar Rav comes and says, Zo divrei Rabbi Meir. Aval chachamim omrim na'aram rasa afilu ketana b'mashma. Now we said it's just a very 6-month small window of opportunity. Okay, I wouldn't say opportunity, but if this were to happen, then the punishment would be stoning. But according to the rabbis, and this is the same machloket they have by a man who rapes a woman. Also, it's called naara there. And the question is it specifically naara, or is it up to and including naara, and even if she's a minor? And this is going to take us for most of the daf today, this topic, because we're going to get a little bit off on it. But the rabbis say naara rasa, even ketana. So the rabbis say it's up to and including naara. And Rabbi Meir says it's only naara. So Amalei Rabachami Difti le Ravina. Mi maid manitin Rabbi Meir he ulemuute ketana dilma Rabbanan ulemuta bogeret betulo. Well, just the same way they have this debate about how to understand the naara in the Torah, you could say it's the same debate about how to understand naara in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said she has to be a naara. Naara could mean up to and including. Why are you assuming the Mishnah's Rabbi Meir that it's only naara? To which he answers, Ravina answers him, Amalei. Look at the wording carefully. What does it say in the Mishnah? Here it says, Eino chayav ad shetehe naara betula murasa. She's not obligated until she is a naara who is betrothed, who is that, which makes it sound like she has to get to that stage. She has to get to the stage where she's betrothed. She has to get, right? But it's really ad shetehe naara. Until she becomes a naara, she won't be liable. So that's the way they read it. If you wanted to read it your way, that it also accords with the rabbi's opinion, and it means up to and including a naara, Eino chayav ela al naara betula murasa mebaile, would have said you're not chayav unless she is, right? In other words, you'd only be chayav for a naara betula murasa. Then you could theoretically say, okay, mebaile means that's what it should have said. But because it says ad shetehe, until she becomes, it sounds like she has to become a naara, and it doesn't work. Vitulo midi, and I have nothing more to say on the topic. Okay, this is a way of saying end of conversation. Don't try to argue with me. I'm absolutely right, and you were definitely wrong. Okay, and there we have the Mishnah must be Rabbi Meir, at least according to the way the Gemara concludes. So now Rabbi Yaakov bar Ada asks Rav the following question. Okay, so remember he's asking Rav because I'm going to have Rav who doesn't even know how to answer. So we're going to see. Rav is going to answer, and then they're going to say something. Then they're going to question Rav, and then he's going to be silent. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Ada asks Rav, Ba'al haktana murasa le Rabbi Meir ma. Now, if we take this Rabbi Meir's opinion, so Rabbi Meir says the Mishnah is only talking about she's already a naara. If she's a ketana, no. So now what happens if a man sleeps with a betrothed woman who's 10 years old. Okay? Ligamre mimayle? Are we saying he's not even obligated anything? Oh, miskila mimayle. Or are we saying this unique halacha for naara murasa that the man gets stoned is only for a naara, not a ketana? But obviously, what will he get? Chenek, strangulation. So that's the question. Does he not get punished at all? And we'll see in a minute why you would even think that. Does he not get punished at all? Or does he just not get the severe punishment of stoning? That the severe thing that we're going to view this as such a terrible thing is only if she's an naara. So that's the question. And then, but then, according to this, he will get strangulation. He will get killed for his actions. She was betrothed, even though she was young. So Amarle, mistaber miskila mimayle. Seems like, okay, Rav answers, logic would tell me that he would still get killed. I mean, he slept with an aram or asa, you just wouldn't get the unique punishment of stoning. To which they ask him, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Ada says, V'haktiv, but wait, the pasuk says, Umetu gam shnehem. Okay, if this is a case, right, where basically he would end up sleeping with her, they both were party to the, right, she did it willingly. It says, Metu gam shnehem. What does that mean? Metu gam shnehem. They both die. Well, the drasha here is, Ad shihu shnehem shavim. They have to be equal. What does it mean equal? In order to kill any one of them, they have to be in the age of mitzvot, in the age of punishments. If she can't get punished, then you won't be able to fulfill Metu Gam Shnehem. Only he would die. Only he would get killed. So what they're basically saying is, you can darshan that pasuk. This is what Rabbi Yaakov Bar Ada is saying. You can darshan that pasuk to say, and in fact, in a minute, we're going to see someone, a Tana, who darshans it that way, that Metu Gam Shnehem teaches you that if she's not in the age of punishments yet, because she's only, let's say, 10, then he won't get punished by the death penalty at all. Again, doesn't mean it's allowed. It's just you're not going to get the death penalty. Shatik Rav. So Rav thought he got the death penalty, and then he throws this pasuk at him, and Rav didn't know what to answer. To which Amar Shmuel says to defend Rav, my time of Shatik Rav, I don't know why Rav was silent. He had a pasuk to pull out himself. V'neimale, he could have said, Umeta ish asher shachav ima levado. Okay, now, this is, okay, if you ever learned the psukim of naara murasa, there's two cases of naara murasa. One is it was in the city, and she didn't scream. Now, if you don't scream and you're in the city, the reason she didn't scream was she was actually not being raped. But if she was in the fields and this happened and she didn't scream, well, the reason why she didn't scream was because no one was going to hear her. And then we assume that she was probably raped. So in that case, we don't make her liable. So we have this case where she's not liable, and it says in that pasuk that me ta'ish asher shachavima levado. Only he gets killed. Now, okay, the context there, we're going to take this out of context. But again, why are we taking it out of context? That's why it's a great day to listen to Din and Daf. It's all about how drashot work. Why do we take it out of context? Because the word levado is unnecessary. You could just say umei ta'ish asher shachavima, and obviously she doesn't, right? If you say he dies, it means she doesn't, right? He gets killed. So what's this word levado coming to teach you? Levado comes to teach there's some other times also where only he is killed, and that's if she's underage. So then he would be killed. And that's what Rav could have said to defend his position. And in fact, the Gemara is now going to say, ketana, and this in fact is a machloka between two Tanaim, who? Rabbi Yoshi and Rabbi Yonatan that we saw earlier in today's stuff. Umetu gam shnehem, and this is just going to be a review of what we just said. Umetu gam shnehem ad shu shnehem shavim, divrei Rabbi Yoshia. He says they both have to be bar onshim, as we say, able to be punished. Rabbi of age. Rabbi Yonatan umer umeta isha shechavima levado. No, he could die alone. Okay, and again, that would be she's too young. V'idach. Now we have to say, what does each one do with the pasuk of the other? Idach hahi umetu gam shnehem my darish bey. Okay, so what does Rabbi Yonatan do with umetu gam shnehem? Amarava lemiute maaseh chidudim. Metu gam shnehem is teaching you only if it was an action that provided pleasure to both of them. Okay, again, we're talking about when this was consensual. Whereas if it was maaseh chidudim, where it was pleasurable for him, like he rubbed his ivar hamin, like his himself on her body, then we would say he's not going to be obligated for that. Now, the Gemara is going to say, the other opinion is going to be, idach maaseh chidudim lav klumhu. You don't need a pasuk to say that. That's obvious. That's not sexual relations. Okay, that's something that was an action that was outside of sexual relations, and that wouldn't be counted. So, okay, you can take this to, different places, but basically we're going to say he has some sort of explanation where it was like a one-sided action, pleasure for him, not for her. That's what Rabbi Yonatan says. That's what this is coming to exclude. Metu gam shnehem. That wouldn't be the case there. But Rabbi Yoshia says you don't need a pasuk for that. That's obvious. V'idach. Okay, what about the other one? Rabbi Yoshia, hai levado my darshbe. What does he do with this levado case? Kiditanya. He uses it for the following. Ba'u aleha asara b'nei adam. Okay, another horrible case to think about. 10 men had sexual relations with her. Va'adayin hi betula. Okay, meaning let's say they all had bi'ashalo kedarka with her. Kulam biskila. They will all get stoned. Okay, so now, according to Tanakama, if she's still a virgin, basically, in all these cases, right? Because it was all bi'ashalo kedarka, it was anal intercourse. So they're all going to get stoned. Or they did it in some way where she was still a virgin. Rebbe Omer, Harishon b'skila v'kulam b'chenek. Rebbe says, what are you talking about? And this is the one that's important for us. This is what Rabbi Yoshia will say with Livado. Livado is not who, he and not her. That was already umetu, he'll die. What's the Livado? There's some cases where it's a number of people, only the first one will get killed. The rest will not, okay? The others, well, they will get killed. They just won't get the skila. They'll get the chenek because they did sleep with a married woman. Okay, we're not letting anybody off scot-free here, okay? They will get punished, just not because it's not the naara morasa anymore. I mean, it's not the specific that she's a betula. So Rebbe says, or even if she is still a betula, still he thinks only one of them gets this stoning punishment. So now we're going to get off on a tangent about this. So what we did, before we get off on our tangent, we had this machloket about which first Yaakov Ra'ada asked Rav, and Rav answered one way, and then he threw a pasuk at him the other way, and Shmuel said, well, Rav could have brought a different pasuk. As Rabbi Yonatan and Rabbi Yoshia debate, this shnehem or livado. Okay, and then we just had to say, what does each do, what the other pasuk, and from that we got to this machloket of Rebbe and the rabbis about what happens if there's 10 people. And Rebbe, which we're going to focus on now, says basically livado means only the first one. So Tana Rabbanan, we're going to get off topic to the bat ish kohen. Ubat ish kohen ki techel liznot. Rebbe omer tchila. He darshans this word tachel, okay, which could mean starts to. It also could mean disgraced herself with, right, lechalel. So he says ki techel liznot. It's a bat kohen who goes and has relations with somebody else, right? While she's betrothed or married, which actually we're going to talk about that right now. We saw a big machloket about that. Rebbe says tchila v'cheinu omer umeta isha shechavi mo ima livado. So Rebbe says tchila first. We don't really understand Rebbe yet, okay? And this is just like umeta isha shechavi ma livado. Okay, we don't understand anything right now. My kamar, what does this mean? So we're going to have two explanations, and with that, we're going to finish our daf. Rebbe Omer, my kamar. Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua. Rebbe ki Rabbi Yishmael Sfirale. Okay, he holds like Rabbi Yishmael, who says, daf nun aleph, de Amar Arusa Yatza L'Sreifa V'Lo Nesua. Remember this? There was a whole debate. Is she betrothed? Is she married? Is she either both betrothed, married? Is she only married, only betrothed? So Rabbi Yishmael said it's only if she's betrothed. Why is that? V'hachi kamar, what he means like this. Tchila liznut. What does that mean? Her first sexual relations was nut. Okay, she was betrothed, but she didn't have sex yet with her husband, and then she had sex with this other man. So in tchilat bi'av, the first time she has relations is bisnut, then she gets sreifa. Be'idach b'chenek, but if it's not her first time, meaning she's already married, then she'll get strangulation. Okay, she doesn't have this unique punishment. So that's what it means. Now, what's this v'chein? Remember, there were two lines. One was, we're going to learn, ki techel is tchila, and just like in our case. So how is this just like in our case? Ki hatam, mahatam, just like there, which there is because they're starting with the bakoi, and there is our case. Just like there, b'tchilat bi'at kamishtaikra, it's the first time she has relations. Remember, she's a virgin. Then the first man that has relations with her, only he's going to get punished. So it's the first time she has relations that this punishment of skila kicks in. And then it's the exact same thing, basically. Okay? Here, b'tchilat, tchilat bi'at kamishtaikra, chanami, just like likewise here, b'tchilat bi'at kamishtaikra, it's the first time she has relations. Amarle Rabbi Bar Abaye, Marlo Hachi Amar, but so-and-so didn't say this. Who's the so-and-so? Manu Rav Yosef. Okay, Rav Yosef explained this totally differently. Rebbe ki Rabbi Meir svirle. It's a different machloket. Niset le'echa min hapsulim mitata bechenet. If she was already married, now we're talking about, it's not because she's only betrothed, this woman, that she's going to get streifa. When is she going to get streifa? She'll get streifa even if she's married and then has relations with someone else. But when won't she get skila? It's coming to exclude a case where she already, where it's not the first, this has to be the first time that she does something to disgrace herself. If she already disgraced herself previously, like for example, she married a mamzer, which you're not allowed to do. So if she married someone who was forbidden her to marry, and she was married and then had relations with someone else, she's not going to get streifa. Again, she'll get punished, she'll get chenek, but she won't get streifa because, right, niseit lechem psulim, then she's already disgraced herself, and then she won't get streifa at the time. Okay, v'hachi kamar im tchilat itchalata biznut b'streifa v'idach b'chenek. So again, if the first time she has znut or does something not appropriate, then she'll get streifa. But if she already did that before, like she married someone who she shouldn't have married, then she won't. Now, my v'chein, now the v'chein is much more complicated. Because v'chein, there, right, here it's the first man who has relations with her, she's still a virgin. There, she's not a virgin anymore. The first time it worked much better. So they say simana ba'alma. It's just a way to remember it. Just like there, levado means the first man who had relations with her. Here, it means the first time she just, it basically means first is the similarity, but it's not really the same at all. Okay, and that ends our daf and ends our topic. And tomorrow, like I said, or already you can learn it today, we'll do the mesit and the mediach, those who incite others to worship idols. But let's just do our quick review. So we finished up with the Menachesh. But the case of Menachesh is we went to Mechalel Shabbat. We went from there to Mechalel Avivi Mo. We had to figure out what's the warning. How do we know the punishment is stoning? And from there we got into some other laws as well. And we all learned where we get it from about Shem Hashem and what the machloket is, why it has to be B'Shem Hashem, or B'Kinoi is enough also, and what that machloket is based on. From that we got to the naara Murasa. What are the criteria to be liable? And the machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about a ketana. And from there we got into this. Well, Rabbi Meir doesn't include a ketana. Well, is he totally not punished at all, or does he get stoned? And for that, we saw there were two opinions. From that, we went off on those two different opinions. And then once we mentioned Rebbe, which was the explanation for what the other one does with this other pasuk, really off on a tangent, we got off on a tangent of something else Rebbe said that connects with the way he darshaned our pasuk. And we had two different explanations of that machloket. And with that, we finish. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom. We should hear good news. We should have the strength to get through these very complicated days.